Welcome to the next episode of the podcast on maritime careers and training. And on this episode, we're going to be discussing work-life balance both at sea and on land. And today I have a special guest, Mr. Sam Samuel. Sam, how are you?
Yeah, all good though.
Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself for those who are tuning in for the first time?
Yeah, had a background of 27 years in the Royal Navy, reaching the rank of warrant officer, taking ships to sea as a sole engineer, equivalent of a merchant navy chief engineer. And as such, learned how to manage life at sea, and then have come ashore and in the last 17 years been teaching at Walsall Maritime School.
Brilliant. So today we're sort of talking about work-life balance, both at sea and on land. Now, we both got experience of sort of balancing both worlds, really. So I think we'll start off at a career at sea. So again, my time at sea was sort of ever so slightly shorter than most due to personal reasons coming shoreside. But again, as a cadet, that work-life balance of managing your studies and managing your TRB at the time and your sea times and the work experience is quite a challenge. So in regards to work-life balance, what are your sort of recommendations starting off as sort of a cadet at first or an apprentice? So that balance of work and learning, what your sort of advice in terms of work-life balance there?
The younger you are, the more energy you've got to deal with the education side of things. You're more astute, you're more driven, and therefore you'll be more focused at an early stage. As you get older, you get issues that come along in the fact that you will end up with partners, you'll end up with a home life, you could end up with children, and as such, you tend to lose your focus a little bit then, and your bias then falls to your family life as opposed to life at sea. So personally, I think if you have eyes on making a career, do it young, and put your efforts in at the early start, and it will then reap rewards later on.
And I think a lot of that matches that on the shoreside roles as well. So you see you see a lot of the youngsters that take on all of the overtime. They're there till late shifts. They're bringing in all the pennies. They've got their life ambitions. And then as they get family, you see a lot more go to salary based rather than hourly rates. I remember a time I was at Ocean Yacht Systems and I came on an hourly rate. Anytime they put a bit of overtime in front of me, I snatched it. Do you want to go here to Plymouth? Go do an installation to Palmer, do an installation. I was always biting their hands off just on that time and a half or time and a third or whatever it was. Whereas a colleague of mine at the time, he was in his 30s, and I just remember it would get to 5 o'clock, boom, he'd be gone. He wouldn't want to do a penny more because his lifestyle changed and his family and things like that. So when at sea, how do you switch off? Because obviously you're surrounded by it all the time. You might be doing watch patterns 8 on 8 off or 8 off 4 on. How do you actually switch off and get a work-life balance at sea?
I think really it's prioritizing the job versus your family life, in the fact that in today's modern world, we have communications which links us directly to our loved ones at home. The problem with that is we've got a distraction. When I went to sea, we relied on old-fashioned things called letters, which took weeks to get there. So when you were at sea, you were just purely focused on the job. You had no distractions. I think it's harder today. I think putting the mobile phone or even to the fact of losing internet access can upset an awful lot of people. So you've got to be very motivated. You've got to be very driven. You've got to know exactly what you want when you go to sea. And you've got to be selfish. You've got to make sure that your time at sea is well spent. But then equally, when you come ashore or you come on leave, then you've got to put your time and efforts into those you've left behind, because they will expect their time with you to be unfettered.
And again, relating that back to shoreside roles, very similar. Of course, you can't quite switch off and get away from it all at sea, but even with the shoreside, it's arranging clear time to do something else, to have other plans, give yourself clear targets, clear points in which you're going to switch off and avoid thinking about work. And if we look at sort of the education sort of side, and obviously me and yourself, Sam, we've been working together for quite a few years. Uh, we always say to the apprentices, and I say to the cadets, y- the cadetship is pretty full on. The apprenticeship is pretty full on, and actually, some students just want to revise, 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 library, 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 and you start to see them burning out. You start to see them stressing, getting tired. And I've always said, pick 4 days of the week, 4 evenings to revise what you did each day. Build on that knowledge you've already got, but always give yourself a couple of clear days. Normally, if I always normally suggest a Friday night and a Saturday for the obvious reasons of those who are over 18 will know. But but again, it's that balance of you can't just do it full on. You can't just keep going, keep going, keep going. Because just like in when you get to the big ugly world of full employment, if you don't manage yourself, you're going to burn out quite quickly.
It's very difficult as a cadet or an apprentice because you want to do well, and often there's a guilt factor for taking days off, especially when it comes towards exams and pressurized times. But again, if you don't make the time, if you don't be sensible about it, you will fail. And so, what you do need along the way is to have a proper balance. And it's very, very difficult to understand the benefit of not working when you're trying to get to an exam. We tend to think that you've got to just keep the candle burning at both ends, and that's not true. So it is very, very difficult.
And I think building off of that, I think there is this tendency to just take time off willy nilly if you have a slight cold and bits and bobs like that. And I think there is a place for that. If you're genuinely ill, you're genuinely ill. But I do think it goes back to that work life balance there of you do need to manage yourself, your health, and your well being. But at the same time, it's a pretty grueling world out there. So finding that balance between workload, home life, and having that balance in terms of your mental health, I think is a key part because you do see a lot of cadets struggle and apprentices struggle. And, a lot of companies will approach it differently. Some companies will protect you quite well and look after you, and especially the vessels as well. And others, you are sort of left to your own devices a lot more.
You are, and I think one of the problems is we have email, we have mobile communications. Most people tend to have a smartwatch with their email attached to it. So it means when you've got downtime, certainly I'm guilty of it in the fact that wherever you are and someone sends you an email, it's pinging you straight away. So if you can get into the habit of checking your emails at the end of the working day, shutting it down, and then isolating yourself from work until the following day at 8:30 or whatever time you have to start, you will find it will reap benefits. You won't be living the life totally, and you'll come back to work or study in a far more refreshed manner. Modern day communications is such a big drag on you, and it takes huge amounts of discipline to separate yourself from it.
Yeah, and I think we've both been in places where it's been really tough. So I remember at sea as a cadet, getting to those exam periods is really tough, and those periods at sea where you come off watch and you're sat there knowing you've got a big job coming up, or the pump ups and pump outs are coming up, and it's going to be a long drawn out process. I always remember I used to. I'm a bit sad. I used to just go back to my cabin and play Football Manager for a couple of hours just to have something to do, something a little bit different to take your mind off of it. I remember when I was working for Marine Scotland up in Alban Amara, me and the chief engineer at the time, we'd go and just put Sky Sports News on and just chat about something completely different. So what were your sort of experiences in the Navy? How did you sort of unwind there on board?
Primarily, we didn't have the same sort of level of social media. TVs were, unfortunately, videos sent out to us, no sort of live TV. But we lived in a world whereby physical fitness played a big role. People entertained themselves by having their own sort of events of an evening. But again, we were a slightly bigger crowd, so there were more people to get around, more people to occupy you, more people to be a distraction. Whereas in the merchant world, you're often left to your own devices. So you've got to be creative. but you can't be isolating. You've got to go and find somebody else, even if you just go and stand on the back end of the boat and have a cup of tea and watch the world go by. And in some respects, it sounds weird, but as a decent set of binoculars and stood on the back end of a boat, it's amazing how much you will see. And again, it's a good unwinder when you get the chance. And again, if the vessel goes to anchor, fishing rod over the side, whether or not you like fishing or not, there's nothing more exciting than dragging some alien species over the side and seeing what the chef can do to put it on the plate for you.
And in terms of the work itself, obviously at times you have peaks and troughs, both shoreside and at sea. Shoreside, a lot of the peaks are in the winter period where a lot of the ships and vessels are coming in, and you're getting the winter shutdowns, the winterizations. But then it can also peak in the summer at the full whack of the summer seasons. So how do you feel is the best way to manage workload in terms of work-life balance, in terms of peaks and troughs? Because the same thing happens at sea, really. You'll have days where you're up, watches are quiet, and then you get days where it's absolutely full on.
Good planning, good thought processes. The fact is, we often find people who will leave things to the last minute. So as you rightly say, when you first come in, it's nice and easy. You've got weeks, and then all of a sudden, the clock is ticking down and the pressure comes on you. So again, having a good understanding of what you need to achieve in that period and having some sensible planning to make sure that it works across the whole period so that you avoid that mad panic stage. At sea, it's even worse in a sense because you're coming to the end of your roster, and you could be going ashore, and it's very difficult at that point not to be motivated. The problem being, if you're not motivated, then things don't get done, and you are leaving work to other people then, and you then get a reputation for not doing the work. So you've got to dig deep, you've got to be motivated, you've got to keep working right to the end, but don't leave everything to the last minute. Good planning, get yourself sorted out.
And we've also discussed things in the past about personal goals and drives. Quite often we can be in a position where we are too fearful of failure, and actually we've set ourselves goals in a time period that become almost unrealistic, and it can be the burden that sits on our shoulders is this threat of I have to complete this by then, I must be second engineer, chief engineer, or senior marine engineer shoreside within a certain period. How do you feel putting that level of stress on your shoulders can affect someone, and what sort of methods of managing expectations could you suggest?
The first thing, you have to know yourself. You have to know what you can achieve, in the fact how hard you can push yourself. I've come across people who have made it their goal to try and be advanced as quickly as possible. That's not bad. It's not a bad thing to do, but it's pressure they put on themselves. Some people enjoy that pressure. Some people embrace it. But I think other people, you have to sit down and realistically look to see what other people have done. Work out whether or not that's something that you could work towards. And the other thing is not to be afraid of failure. You could put yourself forward. You could take a board a bit early. And although you may fail, in yourself initially, it's not a good way to be, but it's a massive learning curve. And it's a good way of assessing where you are. So yes, none of us want to fail, but if you do, then embrace it. And if you go for something, you go for it early and you pass, then even better. You've actually proved that you've got more in the tank than you realise.
And then, of course, as you go through your career, as you sort of mentioned earlier, you might settle down, you might have family and friends you don't see as much, and then you've got family life, so you're married, you've got kids. Again, that balance of work, ambitions, both shoreside and sea, and then family life can be quite difficult to give that balance. Do you want to sort of talk about your personal experience of having, obviously, being married, kids, and then going to sea, and the difficulties and the strengths, and how you dealt with those type of things?
Having a child was very difficult. You realise that you miss big chunks of life of them growing up. And again, in some respects, we used to use videos, but again, we've got social media, which means that you can interact. I actually made stories which could be read at night time. But you've got to remember, it's not just about the child; it's about your spouse and what they expect, and they need to be made to feel special. They need to understand that whilst you're working hard, you're also thinking about them, and it's a real balance between showing that you're making the money, you're progressing yourselves, but if you become selfish and look like it's all about you, then it will cause problems. So it's difficult. No one says it's easy, but when you come home, then you've got to actually set your line in the sand and make sure that they realise that you are there for them, and that you make the time and the energy, which is often what's lacking, to enjoy the group that you've gone back to.
Yeah, and I think the same thing sort of happens shoreside even now. Um, my daughter at the time of the recording is 3, and you realise quite quickly you're at work. Well, I leave it at 7 to 5 each day, and they go to nursery, and you're missing a huge chunk of it. And I think if you are going to have kids, I think you have to have that open and honest conversation with your partner as to what that's going to look like and how it's going to go. Me and my wife, at an early stage, we discussed it, and we said, we're going to have one kid, because most of the time she's going to be in nursery, because we're both full-time workers alongside being a full-time worker. And BMTA deliver the Marine Electrician Skills Boot Camp in evenings, 7 till 9. So again, a big chunk of that I'm either working or away from that. The flip side of that is working evenings. I do keep my work-life balance correct. So we do a lot of the online courses, or I do the marking and bits and bobs after Evie has gone to bed, my daughter. And so working around that ethos, again, is one of the things that we as a business try to do. We try to be flexible and understanding of people's family home life, work life, and trying to allow people to progress and complete these training courses and personal self development without hindering family life and work life and finances and so forth. And it is a difficult balance. Like I said, me and my wife decided at quite early doors we were only going to have one child, on the basis that we were going to miss so much of that day to day life with Evie. The flip side of that is we do really make use of the time we have. So weekends, we make sure we're always out doing a walk or taking Evie on new experiences. We invest in her education and swimming, because we're in a fortunate enough position to be able to do so. But if you are going to do those extra hours, it's finding the right balance of when to do them. I know for a fact that you have a habit of getting up quite early, and off you go to Starbucks or up for a coffee when you know your family and friends are still in bed because you're an early riser. How do you sort of balance that when you have to do work? How do you balance it so it's as little of a hindrance on family life as possible?
Um, First of all, you've got to be open. You can't lie in what you're doing. My other half is very understanding. She knows that I put in long hours when I need to, and because I'm open with her, tell her that I've got deadlines. She's supportive of it. But again, it is about trying to make sure that you don't allow it to affect the home life. I would much rather get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do some marking, so that in the evening, although you may be a bit tired, they expect time with you and you expect time with them. So it's not interfering. Um, Purposely try and keep it away from weekends, because that should be a special time. You can't always achieve it, and you've got to do certain things. But again, if you're honest about what you're doing, and as long as you don't make it too much of a habit, I found that I've always been supported. So once you start letting it take the priority over your home life, is when things start going wrong. Not just with your spouse or other half, but with your children, because then you're not inputting into their life.
And that brings us on to the part where we're sort of talking about watching out for the signs. So it can be quite difficult to recognize when you are getting to that point where work life balance is a hindrance. I remember a time at a previous role I had, I was a full time lecturer, but on top of that, we were also in a position where I was dealing with things such as IQA, and all of a sudden the work life balance became unmanageable. But as you said, I felt guilty to turn around and say, no, I can't do this, or no, I'm not willing to do that, or I don't have enough time. And by the time I tried to reach out, it was almost like, well, don't fix what's working. And I refused to let it fail. And it drove me mad. And I remember really struggling to know sort of who to speak to and where to go. But it doesn't have to be that way. What would your advice be on a what? Let's start off with what are the signs of becoming overwhelmed or poor work life balance?
I think when you sacrifice your home life for the job, when you make the job the priority, um, like you say, there are times when there are deadlines, but when you allow the minor bits to also take over your life, um, I found much the same as you that what saw me as my undoing was the fact that I was working probably at one point 14 or 15 hours a day on a regular basis, not finding any time for home life. I was actually literally working on the job, going to bed, grabbing a few hours sleep, getting back up and doing it again. And I regret that nobody spotted me doing it because it caused serious problems further down the line. So what you need to do is you need to look at what you're doing. You need to keep an eye on the hours you're working, and then also look at your productivity. Because if you're up for 14, 15, 16 hours and all you do is just shuffle paper from one side of the desk to the other or write several emails which have got no real value, then something's going wrong. So you need to have to stop and reevaluate. And you have to be brave. You have to go and talk to somebody and say, am I doing the right thing? And hopefully, if you've got a good line manager or better still, a support network at home, people will say to you, ease up, you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and that sort of brings us on to the second part of the question, which is, who do you go speak to? What are the support services? So you're right. You need to have. Hopefully, you're in a company where it is open and there is a support network there. But you need to speak to your colleagues. You need to speak to your friends, line managers. But there are external services out there as well. So the Samaritans and so forth that you can go and speak to if you are struggling and need support. And again, for those who are at sea, the Nautilus is a useful point of contact to speak to, and you can speak to your hopefully your second your chief engineers, the master, and as required, the designated person ashore. Is there any others you'd sort of recommend speaking to for guidance?
Mission to Seamen, Seafarers Society, they're all, a lot of them are actually based in ports. They are a great source of assistance. We used to use them all the time, sometimes just as a breakout space. Around the world, sometimes you've got swimming pools or bars. They can make sure that you can get a phone call if you're struggling to get home. Even to the fact of buying a stamp if you want to send a postcard home, bit old fashioned, but some people like it. So there are people out there who will help you. But also having a confidant on board is always useful. Somebody you can talk to and trust that they don't go away gossiping, because it is very isolated. So you do need someone you can trust. It's fraught with danger if you pick the wrong person and they start gossiping about you, then you feel very silly. But hopefully by that time you've actually grown to know people and you know when to keep stum and when to talk to people. So um, yes, lots out there. Um, but as a male, as a chief engineer, none of us want to admit defeat, and that's the hardest thing. It's knowing when to actually reach out to these people and not be ashamed to put your hand up and say, "I am struggling. I need some help at this point."
Again, that's just saying again, your shore side. Quite often you'll be put with a mentor, and again, speaking to your mentor on that balance. And if we go back to the sort of student aspect of this, or the apprentice, a full time student, whatever it is, again, wherever you're at in terms of the learning provider or whoever your training provider is, there will be support networks there. So in terms of cadetships, quite often you'll have a cadet liaison officer. At colleges, you will have an assessor or a tutor. again, reach out to those people, speak to them, because there's no point in suffering in silence. And if you are struggling with that work-life balance, quite often, whoever it is will be able to put some key targets in place. It's prioritizing the tasks that are imminent, starting to actually recognize those things that perhaps aren't as important and actually can be put on the back burner, so they're not at the forefront of your mind. But one thing I always remember is, you know, no one's ever been killed by not finishing off a job or finishing a bit of paperwork off. Of course, unless it's safety critical, and then all you're going to do is leave it in a safe position in a safe space. But in terms of all the other things, it's okay sometimes to just say, you know what, that can wait for another day.
Yeah, and the other thing to bear in mind, especially shoreside, the people who, as a young cadet or an apprentice, the people who want to help you are your parents, and that's often a problem because they will know the answers, um, and they will try and point and guide you, but that's not always the solution. They mean well, but sometimes you need to go and talk to the professionals away from family life because they're not quite so prescriptive. That doesn't mean that you don't listen to them. They're probably huge amounts of knowledge. They know you better than anyone else. But just bear it in mind that they are there to protect you.
So I think just to bring this to a close, then, in essence, summary for work-life balance, I think from our point of view is try the best you can to keep your work between your work hours, 8 till 5 or whatever they are. If you do require to take work home, speak to your loved ones, speak to your family, and make sure you're doing it in suitable, agreed, sort of allocated time. So for myself, it's after my daughter goes to bed in the evening when we're just winding down. Don't don't be worried about reaching out and asking for help. What's the saying? A problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah, two miserable people.
Yeah. So again, it's well known, and no one will ever kick off and say, you know, that's not good enough. Someone would always say, right, let's find the solutions. Let's sit down and articulate the problem, find the solution, and put it into action. And again, there's always another day.
There is. You can always come back to it. And as you say, apart from the safety side of things, no one's going to die because you haven't done something. People may get annoyed, but at the end of the day, your health is more important.
Yeah. So again, BMTA, we've got a free self-directed course on health and well-being. Please feel free to take that through. It looks at various sort of aspects, mental well-being, drug and alcohol awareness, work-life balance. Please take a look at that course if you wish to. It is completely free, and as per all of the episodes on the podcast, we don't do this for any financial incentive. We're trying to just raise awareness and give you some unbiased clarity of the industry, careers and training, and it's all just professional and personal advice. But for any of you who do wish to support what we're doing and support those others that are out there, we do ask for, if anyone who can afford to provide a donation to our charity of the year. And again, at the bottom of the podcast page, there's more information on how to donate to our charity of the year and support others who aren't able to access certain resources and education in the maritime industry, and that it is greatly appreciated. So that's the end of this episode. I hope you found it useful, and we will see you next time.